What is going on, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of The Rose Show. As always, I'm your host, Jay. Who else but me? And today is the very first week of my 5 weeks of Halloween series. And my very first guest is the homie Bukshot. He is one of the hardest working individuals I've ever met in my life. That's not an understatement. This dude grinds more than 99% of the people out there that I know. And that's not an over-exaggeration at all. This dude is one of the biggest entrepreneurs in underground music I've ever been around. And I don't think this scene gives him nearly enough credit as he deserves for being the G that he is. Because at the end of the day, the underground music scene comes down to one thing, and that is hard work, period. That's all it comes down to. And he is one of the hardest working dudes I've ever known. So I've got a lot of respect for him in that aspect. And not only that, he's never been anything but polite to me. Never been anything but cool to me. And I always enjoy being around him whenever we cross paths. So it was an honor to have him on. And I thought he'd be a great very first addition to the 5 weeks of Halloween series, because nobody kills shit quite like Bukshot. So, hey, 'tis the season, right? So, anyway, enough of my babbling. I'm not going to keep you too much longer, except I'm going to do one thing, and that's remind you of wherever you're listening to this or watching to this on, please like and subscribe wherever it might be, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, whatever. Help the show out, help us grow. And not only that, make sure you join my free Patreon account at www.patreon.com/theroseshowpod. Join there. You'll get the rest of the lineup for the 5 weeks of Halloween. When you do, right now, it is posted. All you got to do is scroll, and you will see who the rest of the guests for this month are going to be. It is posted right now. Not only that, we got some bonus content over there. I tell a story about how I almost ruined the Ken Shamrock episode over there. It's uploaded now. You can go check out that video. It's not posted anywhere else, only on Patreon. And that's all I got to say. So let's go ahead and get into the episode right after a word from my sponsors. Let's do it, y'all. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Jay, and I'm here to tell you about my sponsor, W Energy. Now, what is W Energy? Well, I'm going to tell you because I myself use W Energy. Here I've got this Calio cream. It's got a great flavor to it, and not only that, it is clean energy. Energy that's not going to make you crash, not give you the jitters. I've been looking for a reason to drop all my old energy drinks that were unhealthy for me. Too much additives, too much trash in it, too much stuff that's going to make you crash, make you fall asleep at the end of the day. Not W. So how can you get your hands on some W to try? I'm going to tell you how. And I'm going to tell you how to save some money while you do it. Go to www.w.gg, and at checkout, type in my new promo code, and it is Who Else? That's right. The promo code at www.w.gg is Who Else? Because, hey, who else but me, your boy Jay? I wouldn't steer you wrong, right? And when you do, make sure you tag your boy. Let me know you got some, you tried it, and I know you're going to love it. All right, everybody, it's time to stop and let you know about today's sponsor of the show, Crazy Martin's in Piqua, Ohio, one of my favorite places in the entire world to go to. Crazy Martin's has provided their customers with quality products for over 20 years, from ashtrays to water pipes and everything in between. Stop in, check out their selection, and of course, check out their pinball machines. With over 20 pins to choose from, there is something for everyone. Crazy since 1996. I don't just say this about every place. I love going to Crazy Martin's. I've always loved going to Crazy Martin's ever since I was of age to go to Crazy Martin's. It's one of my favorite places in the entire world. Me and my wife go there almost every Sunday to play pinball machines. It is one of the funnest spots in Ohio you could possibly find. It is in Piqua, Ohio. Check out their website at www.crazymartins.com. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of The Rose Show. As always, I'm your host, Jay. Who else but me? And today, my guest is somebody that I have got a truck ton of respect for, just because this dude has been able to do something that most people try really hard and never even get close of achieving. He has carved his own path in the underground, done his own thing without compromising who he is, what he wants to do in his style. And that is something that I don't think people can quite really appreciate unless if you've actually been on the grind and know how hard it is. But he's done it, and he's done it at a high level and has for quite some time. I've been knowing him for about the last 10 years, and we've crossed paths, not only myself as being a promoter, but as a musician as well. And I can't even count the amount of times I've been around this dude and been able to work with him. And it's been a pleasure each and every single time. It is the one and only Bukshot of mob style music. My brother, how we doing today, bro?
What up, homie? What up, everybody? I'm doing great.
Good, 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 good. Well, I'm glad we got a chance to sit down and talk because, as I've stated on this show so many times, it doesn't matter how long I've known you. If we're in the music game, there's a good chance that really the only time we get a chance to talk is on show day. And I don't really get an opportunity to really get to know people outside of that kind of environment. So, what I want to do today is I want to do a deep dive on everything you. We're going to start at the beginning and go all the way through to where we are now. So, go ahead and turn the floor over to you. Go ahead and give us a little bit of background of how you started and a little bit what it was like being a tiny buckshot.
Well, basically, let's rewind back to I dropped my first single, which was called Something to Creep To. I dropped that back in 1996. And that did not even come out on CD. It was just, it was a cassette single only. And it was, here in Louisville, it was actually one of the fastest selling singles that have ever dropped here in my city. I remember the district manager at the time for Camelot Music, which ended up going on to be FYE Music, but before it was FYE, it was Camelot. And the district manager, Chris Beach, told me that at the time, the big single out in the whole country was Coolio, Gangsta's Paradise. And he said that was the number one selling single in their chain, which it was the number one song at the time. And he said in Kentucky, my single was the only single that outsold that single.
No shit.
So that was for me, especially being new at this, that was a pretty big deal. And you also have to think, uh, back then, artists didn't drop the way they drop now.
Right.
Now everybody's got a computer and a microphone in their basement. And it wasn't like that when I started. If you came out with an album or a song for that matter, people you didn't really see independent artists back then. So it's like when,
Right.
when you had a song, people kind of already put you on a level like you're already signed because, there weren't a lot of studios, but to go to the studio, it was so expensive
Yeah.
that it was a big deal, even if you had a song. So I think at the time, people kind of already assumed I was a signed artist, but I put it out independently. And that obvious off the top of my head, I want to say it sold around 2,000 copies, which is a huge number for, an unknown artist to just to drop a cassette like that and, sell that many copies. Man, well, you know what? I ordered 2,000. I don't think I quite sold 2,000. I mean, I probably gave away a couple hundred of them. So, I
Sure.
probably I probably sold, let's say 1,700 if I'm just trying to be accurate about the thing. But when we got rid of those, I took the money from that and I put out my first album a year later in 1997, which was called Welcome to the Ville. And Welcome to the Ville went on to sell 7,000 CDs and 1,000 cassettes. I ordered total, well, the first order was 2,000 CDs and 1,000 cassettes. and the cassettes, that was when CDs kind of became like the new hot thing. So 7,000 CDs, and then that was 97. So then 3 years later in 2000, I dropped my second album independently, which was called One More for the Haters. And I sold uh, 15,000 CDs. And then I got picked up by Warner Brothers, and they put the album out, and I sold another 15,000. So we're at 30,000 copies of my second album. And the Warner Brothers thing didn't last. I think major labels were just trying to find something that they were just trying to throw out that was either going to blow up, and if it just didn't blow up, they just dropped you. Which to me, selling 15,000 copies extra on top of what I sold was already a big deal. But to Warner Brothers, that it was just like, okay, on to the next thing. So I got out of the Warner Brothers contract and put out my third album, They Still Don't Love Me, in 2002, and that went on to sell 100,000 copies.
Mm.
So, in my head, I'm thinking like this thing's really getting ready to take off, because if you look at the numbers, the way they've kept increasing. And then I put out my next album in 2004 or 5. I don't remember the year, but it was No White Flags, and it sold 10,000. And that was the age of Napster. That is when people started streaming and they quit buying CDs in the stores. So, I go from 7 to 30 to 100 back down to 10,000. It almost seemed like everything was going to like die off. And then where, I always call streaming like digital music, it like started out as my worst enemy, and it ended up becoming an independent artist's best friend. So,
Yeah.
I've kept pushing, and, I've had over, off the top of my head, 65 releases total, between the group projects I've done, solo projects, singles, between 65 and 75 digital releases. So I've made a really good career.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So when you guys started, because I've obviously listened to a lot of your catalog, and I've listened to some of those early albums that you just talked about. The style was more gangster rap at that time, as opposed to kind of what you do now, which is more of the horrorcore scene, I guess you could call it that, just for reference. How did you transition from that original style, the more gangster rap and everything? And the imagery was the same. I think one of the album covers, you have a briefcase and you're handcuffed to the briefcase, and it kind of looks like an underground transact or a gangster transaction, stuff like that. How did you transition from that into going towards the more beginnings of mob style?
Well, the first, that was actually my first album, Welcome to the Ville. And I think aesthetically, looking at the album cover, it kind of looked more street. But if you actually listen to some of the songs on there, it was already, there were already songs that would apply to what's going on now.
Sure.
I've always been a huge fan of the Wicked Underground, of just, wicked music in general. And I remember when I was recording my first album, I was listening to Esham and Insane Clown Posse back then.
Yeah.
So I was already inspired. I was already inspired by the scene that, what it is now. But just uh, you know, listening to other people giving me advice, people telling me like you have to have a radio single, and
Yeah.
so I think just for several albums I was just kind of trying to find myself. And I would always like make a song for the radio, and I never cared about that shit, but like I had managers who came in and out, and they were like, you got to have a radio song, you got to have a club song. So I would always make a song like that or two, but I still loved like doing like the dark wicked shit. and like the street shit, because I mean I was on the street, I was selling drugs, and I was in and out of gangs, and I was in and out of prison and jail. I was living that life. But I mean, if you look at like my third album, They Still Don't Love Me, I had a feature with Brother Lynch Hung on that album. That was 2002. So, I've really been doing this for a long time, but it is just, it's just kept evolving into what it
Yeah.
is today.
How did you end up becoming, and this is something I always like asking people along the I-75 area because it just intrigues me because I'm into dorky shit like this. But how did you get introduced to Esham and ICP and all that kind of stuff? Because again, if you're on I-75, this is kind of like the corridor for the home of all that, right all the way down to Tennessee, all the way up to Michigan. How did you get introduced to all that?
Well, as funny as it sounds, I was always intrigued by like underground music. I always soaked up with Murder Dog magazine, Double XL, and the Source. Especially with
Mm,
Murder Dog. But I was always turned like I knew what was going on musically, even though this is before the internet or anything. So I'm reading about these artists, and one of my best friends, still to this day, his name's Big Sean. He's actually from Saginaw, Michigan, and he is the person who turned me on to Esham. He moved down here from Saginaw and turned me on to Esham, so I became a big Esham fan. And then uh that kind of like led me over. I remember the first ICP album I bought was Ringmaster, and I've listened to ICP hardcore ever since Ringmaster. And then I went back and got, their only album before that was Carnival of Carnage, so I went
right.
back and got that, and just I've kind of been with the scene ever since. But going down like that Esham ICP rabbit hole, between that and magazines, like I was keeping up like on like the wicked shit underground, like Detroit music and everywhere else. And like I was listening to I'm a big rap a lot music fan, so like Ghetto Boys and Scarface and Gangsta Nip. I mean, I was like listening to all that shit. I was soaking up everything that came out. And I remember one of the first albums that the industry deemed as horrorcore was the group Flatliners from New York. They were signed to Def Jam, and actually, uh, one of the artists on Flatliners was actually Russell Simmons' nephew. And I was listening to Bedlam and Prozac. I mean, anything that was coming out from that scene, I was listening to it and just soaking it all in. And over time, I just slowly transitioned into what I'm doing now.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So at what point did you, because you mentioned, you dabbled a little bit with the big record companies and found out very quickly that wasn't the route you were going to go. And like you said, MP3s and Napster and Kazaa and all that stuff started to really take hold and really started to change the industry. At what point were you like, you know what, I'm going to do my own thing? Because again, I think if anybody knows you, you are known at this point for being the guy who stays in his own lane and does everything he wants to do by himself and is very successful at it. How did you start? Be like, hey, I'm going to create this thing called mob style music and I'm going to run with it.
Well, the funny thing is, mob style music was created. My first album, Welcome to the Ville, had a mob style music logo on it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, that my first album. And obviously the art for the logo has evolved since then, and it's become, what everybody has, this right here, what everybody,
Yeah.
knows is that logo. But when it first came out, me and my homie Big Sean I was referring to earlier, uh we actually had a tattoo artist draw the original, you know, Smoking Joe skull. And but yeah, since my first album, mob style music was on the first album, and I've just kept that ever since. It's just, it's what I've rolled under, and it just I never thought that mob style would be where it is today. I've got a gigantic warehouse,
Right.
16-foot tall warehouse, and it's just full wall to wall full of merch and just everything. But I just look back now and I'm just like, wow, like, look what this has turned into. It's actually very, very humbling.
Yeah. Did you always kind of have like a sense of creativity in the aspect of, man, as far as merch game goes, like your designs, and I'm not just saying this because you're here. I think anybody that has seen your merch can agree. Your merch designs are almost second to none out of anybody. Did you always have that kind of visual creativity even from a younger age, or was that something you kind of taught yourself? Because again, your designs for anything, merch, album covers, whatever it might be, they're top notch. Was that always something that came natural to you, or did you figure that out later?
Honestly, yes. I didn't understand how to transition it from my mind into reality,
Okay.
but like I always had what it took. I had the creativity, but I didn't have the connections or the right people that I knew how to explain what's up here and to make this happen. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? So it's like
Right.
I had the creativity, but I just didn't know what to do with it to make it, what it is. And just over time, it's just evolved. But yeah, the creativity was always there. I mean, my creativity has always come from movies and comic books and video games. That's kind of where it all, starts from that to my imagination. I've always had a really wild imagination. I'm a huge, I love horror movies. I love science fiction. Uh, I love like mafia flicks. I mean, I've got a very, very broad and wild imagination. And, between watching wrestling over the years and movies and cartoons and games and, playing Dungeons and Dragons and I've just had this wild, wild ride of a life that's just, everything that I see or I touch or I experience, I soak it up and assimilate. So what comes in must come out. So, that's what you get from all this.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to take a sidebar here real quick because you said a buzzword for me. And like I said, this is another reason why I like doing stuff like this is because I get to know details about people I've known for years, but I might not know, they're into a certain thing. You said wrestling, which have always been a huge fan of, hence the Money in the Bank briefcase in my setup here. Um, what were some of your, rather, let's just start at the beginning. How did you get into professional wrestling?
I mean, obviously, when I was a kid, on Saturday mornings, like when I was a kid, there wasn't internet or nothing. You
Right.
got cartoons when you got out of school that started like at 3:30 until 5 o'clock. So you had an hour and a half of cartoons Monday through Friday. And when you were a kid, you know, the thing to do was wake up early, because obviously you're a kid, your parents don't let you stay up late. So, I'm probably asleep by 9 or 10, every night. And,
Right.
Saturday morning, you wake up at 8 o'clock, make a bowl of cereal, and you've got cartoons from the time you wake up. And every kid I knew in the neighborhood was glued in front of that TV until 12 o'clock. Then all the
Yeah.
kids would turn off the TV at 12 and go play. But at 12 o'clock, that's when wrestling came on. So, like, I'm talking like Jerry Lawler, like back in them days. And obviously it started out with like Saturday morning wrestling. And then obviously, when Hulk, I think Hulk Hogan alone, he spawned a generation
Yeah.
of I mean, I would have to credit Hulk Hogan a whole lot, which I'm talking about Hulk Hogan in the 80s. I'm not talking about some of the shit Hulk Hogan's talking about now, but back in the 80s, Hulk Hogan was he was like a hero. He was somebody little kids we looked up to Hulk Hogan, and Andre the Giant and Iron Sheik, and I mean that whole era, Junkyard Dog,
Yeah.
Roddy Rowdy Piper, just watching wrestling, when they had the wrestling cartoon, and so I became a wrestling head big time. I will say, unfortunately, I after music got really, really big for me and it started taking up my time, I still keep up with wrestling, but I don't keep up with it like I used to. I mean, there was a
Yeah.
period for 6 or 7 years I didn't miss a pay-per-view. Monday nights, my homies were like, "Don't fuck with Buck till 11 o'clock." Monday nights, dude. When it was the WCW and Raw,
Yeah.
the wrestling wars, like people knew, like my phone didn't even ring because they knew, like I'm not going to answer it. And
Right.
but yeah, wrestling was my life for a long, long time. And like I said, sadly, I still keep up with it, and I still have a deep love for it. But some of my best friends, I keep up through what's going on through them, but I just don't have the time to devote to it like I used to. But wrestling, it is one of my original, one loves.
Yeah, sure. See, you mentioned Jerry Lawler. Did you guys get Memphis wrestling and syndication where you lived then? Because I mean, you were pretty close to that.
Yep, that's what it was. Yep,
Yeah.
yeah. Every
Interesting.
every
Wow.
Saturday at noon, man. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty crazy, especially considering the fact like my introduction to Jerry Lawler. Because again, like you've alluded to it multiple times here, this is obviously pre-internet, so the only thing that you're getting is what's on cable and stuff like that. My introduction to Jerry Lawler was the commentator, so I didn't get a chance to see all that. I didn't realize just how big of a deal Jerry Lawler was in the South until later when streaming came around and documentaries started coming out. Jerry Lawler was a fucking rock star at one point in time, was he not?
Oh, he was, yeah. I mean, like especially when I was a kid before Hulk Hogan, like he kind of like was Hulk Hogan. You know,
Right.
as weird as that sounds, because I look at. I mean, I know like you didn't come up on that, but you still have respect for it. But like I
Yeah.
kind of look at him in a weird way, kind of like a lot of people would look at Hulk or Stone Cold. He
Sure.
was kind of like a great at the end, especially when you're a kid, you know, everything looks so much bigger to you. So even though
Right.
Jerry Lawler was never as big as Hulk, when you're a kid, he is.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially back then, because the syndicated shows, you were able to have regional stars like that. I think in New Orleans, Junkyard Dog at one point in time, New Orleans and Texas area, Junkyard Dog was their Hulk Hogan. Like he was a massive star that he used to sell out the Superdome back when, Michael Hayes and the Freebirds and the Von Erichs were doing their thing. Junkyard Dog was the number one wrestler in that area. So that makes perfect sense. Where you have a Jerry Lawler who might not have been a national star, like a national star as far as Hulk Hogan goes, but in that area, man, he was the business. Yeah, for sure. Well, that's cool. That's cool, man. I like I said, I like hearing little tidbits of information like that. Um, so when I think when most people who are quote unquote juggalos like myself, I think the very first real big exposure we got to what you do was when you started working with Boondocks. How did that relationship start coming across? Because for me, I think it was the Wormwood tour when I first heard your name. How did you end up getting linked up with him?
Well, that all started. Uh, Boondocks and I followed each other on social media. I believe it was
Mm,
Twitter at the time, and you know, the fact that I'm from Kentucky, Boondocks was from Georgia. I think the South thing, there were always a lot of fans that would always say, "I want to see you and Boondocks work together." And I didn't know Dirty back then. And but like I said, we followed each other, and this was, he was on Psychopathic Records, obviously, and but just uh a lot of my fans were also Boondocks fans. So just a
Yeah.
lot of them were naturally telling me and him, you all should work together. And I remember I ended up messaging him on Twitter, and I'm like, I'm sure you see these fans dropping our names all the time. And, he laughed and was like, yeah. And I was like, we should do something. And he was like, let's do it, which ended up being Underground Avengers.
That's something else I wanted to talk about because you said a little bit ago that your influences come heavily from comics as well. Um, First and foremost, how did you get the idea of Underground Avengers? Because that is a slick name.
Yeah, the funny thing, it almost more started like, I don't want to say a joke, but it started with me and my homie Amsterdam. Me and Amsterdam, we talk probably three times a day sometimes, but we'll just call and check in. Like if it's 5 or 6 o'clock and I haven't talked to him, or I'll call him up and be like, "Hey, I ain't heard from you. I'm just checking in," and he'll be like, "I ain't got nothing, but neither do I." All right, talk to you. Talk to you when I talk to you. We'll just check
Right.
in just to update each other. We keep each other updated with music, and he is the biggest wrestling head I know. So like he keeps me kind of up to date a lot with wrestling, and he still goes to wrestling matches, and he's actually friends with some pretty big wrestlers, and he's
Oh, yeah.
really involved in that life. But it started in his apartment. We were kind of like, you know, me, Boondocks, and Class, we're kind of like the Underground Avengers, kind of like people who have clicked up for like the same cause. And it was kind of like a tongue in cheek thing. Like that would be a dope name for the group. Call it Underground Avengers.
Yeah.
And I remember we were watching of the movie, the first, The Avengers, was still at the movie theaters, and he had like a bootleg copy of it, and we were at the house watching it. And that's kind of like how the whole conversation came up. And I remember like calling up Dirty and then calling up Class and like, what do you think about if we call it like the Underground Avengers? And like, we always looked at Boondocks kind of like Boondocks was like the bigger artist, and his favorite person was Iron Man in the comic universe. And I equated myself to the Hulk, for many reasons. And Class, his guy was always Captain America, and like it just kind of like organically happened the way it happened.
Yeah. So, on top of comic book themes, you incorporate a lot of both imagery and musically. You incorporate a lot of the culture that you were talking about as far as comic books, horror, video games, all that kind of stuff. Have you ran into any issues? Because I know it is kind of, for a lack of better terms, it's kind of liberal when it comes to creative licenses in the underground. There's a good chance nobody is going to notice. However, you have situations where, like, a Bakelo tried to do something called Grinch music, and he ended up getting sued by Dr. Seuss, whatever that combo is.
Bakelo
Uh,
did.
yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
know that.
they
I
try.
never heard that. That's wild.
Yeah, so the backstory on that, and I know this is because I was traveling with him on. Me and him were working for Twisted on the Psychomania tour, and he was putting together this label with Big Sherm, who is a friend of mine.
I remember
He was,
that. I remember when they
yeah,
started the whole Grinch music thing. I actually remember that.
yeah, and they had to shut it down almost immediately because Dr. Seuss's people sent them a cease and desist. Have you ran into anything like that? Because again, you've got a lot of that imagery that, could be, somebody could have a problem with that, but we are in the underground where it might not pop up on their radar. Have you had any issues like that?
Yeah, the first Underground Avengers album, we got cease and desisted by Marvel.
Ooh.
Yeah, their attorneys from New York, they sent me a email. It was very professional, but they just basically said you have to pull everything down that has any kind of Marvel imagery in it. You have 5 days to pull everything off your website. We pulled it off in 3, but uh, their thing was the imagery. That's why there were 2 versions of the album. That's why the first, well, technically, the first version we put out didn't have the faces. I don't know if you remember the version that had like the Hulk, the Captain Shield, and Iron
Yeah.
Man's faces.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Technically, that was the second release because the first release was supposed to come out at the gathering. And when we sent it to, was it Disc Makers or Nationwide Disc? The first company we sent it to, they wait 4 days and said, we can't press this because you're using like imagery from Marvel. We don't want to get sued.
Right.
And I'm like, what the shit? So, like, I had to remake the cover that didn't have our faces on it. And we literally got the CDs shipped to us in Illinois at the hotel. We got the CDs the first day of the gathering. That's how close we cut it because we had to have the artwork completely changed. And, you know, we were already cutting it close of having it for the gathering. So when we sold out of that first version, I put it out with a different company, the second pressing, and that had the Marvel faces on it. But then that's when we got the cease and desist after it was already close to being sold out. So
Yeah.
we pretty much, you know, when we put up the letter that we're getting cease and desisted for the next 3 days, like everybody like bought it like crazy because they knew like this thing's going to be a collector's item. And
Right.
then
Yeah.
so after it got you know, cease and desisted, we put the third version back out again without the Marvel faces. So there were technically three pressings of that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So is that the only instance then so far? Because again, you do it. And if not, then that kind of is a testament to you if you've never had another trouble because it seems like you figured out the formula. Or have you ran into issues since
That
then?
was that was my only legal, you know. Well, they never sued. They just said cease and desist. If you
Right.
don't pull it, we're going to sue you. So obviously, I'm not going to try to go up against Marvel. That would be a failure. But no, that was the only bump in the road I had.
Interesting. Cool. Well, like I said, you've been doing this for a long time. And I always like hearing a really good road story. Do you have any story at all? I'm saying the words road story right now. Is there anything that pops in your head or like, oh, this is a good one?
Uh, I've got a few. I'm just trying to think of what I should and shouldn't say.
Fair
uh,
enough. Fair enough.
yeah, I've got some really good ones, but like it probably wouldn't be a good idea to talk about them. I remember one when we were actually on the Wormwood tour. The guy who booked that, uh, we had like a email address or a PayPal account where the deposit money was supposed to be going for the shows, and the guy that booked it, I ended up digging in. We were on the tour, and I ended up finding out. Me and Boondocks were talking, and I said, I think this promoter guy's like doing something shady. And so I called him up. We found out that PayPal money was getting sent to his direct PayPal. And that's not how it was
Mm,
supposed to be arranged. You know, we had a separate PayPal account where all deposits were supposed to go. And then he would get his cut from us. I forgot what city we were in, but I told him on the phone, I said, you know, it might be 3 weeks from now, it might be 3 months from now, or it could be 3 years. I said, but the next time I see you, I said, I'm going to slap the shit out of you. And 5 days later, we were in California City, California. And sure enough, man, that dude popped up there.
uh,
And Boondocks tapped me and said, look. And I looked up and he's walking toward us. And I'm like, this guy's lost his mind. And he walked up to me and he said, "What's up, Buckshot?" And he held his hand out, and I held my hand out like I was going to shake his hand, and I just slapped the shit out of him. And he
It's
he held his face and he said, "What was that for?" And I said, "Because I'm a man of my word." And I remember I didn't want an altercation to like break out, because this is before the show and there was a lot of people there already. But I remember at the end of the night, I can't believe he stuck around, but at the end of the night, Boondocks ended up punching him. So,
so is that where the origination of buck slap came from?
well, not at the term wasn't coined then, but I've been slapping people for years, like many years even before that started. No, like let me tell you how genius this is. Slapping people is such a good thing to do because if you punch somebody, for one, I got a pretty damn hard punch, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm always scared about if I hit somebody the wrong way, I'm gonna kill them. Like seriously, you could kill somebody, but if you hit them the right way, and that's not something to like joke with, because like if you kill somebody and unless like they attacked you first, you're probably going to go to jail for the rest of your life.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it started a long time ago. I was outside of a strip club and I punched this guy, and I thought I killed him. I was terrified, and he wasn't moving, and he ended up, I walked like 6 feet away from him because I was kind of getting ready to start freaking out, and the dude just jumped up off the ground and took off running. So he was playing dead because I think he thought I was going to fuck him up, which I probably would have. I was so mad. So I'm kind of glad I think I hit him so hard. I think it did knock him out, but I think he came back to, and he knew I was right there. So he just continued to like lay there and act like he was unconscious. But I thought I killed him. And I
Right.
was like, I wasn't acting terrified to everybody around me, but I was a scared motherfucker because I'm thinking if I just killed this guy, like it's over, it's all over. And
Right.
I mean, like I wasn't justified. The guy was just talking shit to me. I
Yeah.
wouldn't have been justified in court if I had killed the guy. But so after that, I just told myself, I was like, it's not worth killing somebody or going to jail over. But at the same time, I don't want to like break a knuckle or break a finger. I don't want to hurt myself hitting somebody too. So my whole mentality about slapping people is, if somebody ain't about shit, you could slap them, and I've never ever slapped anybody that swung back on me ever.
Yeah.
So like slapping people, it almost solves the problem. It's like
Yeah.
you slap them, you slap the pride out of them, and like usually they just look at me crazy, like, "What was that for?" You know what I'm saying? So it's like you slap somebody, so like they're not going to go to the hospital for it, and you just slapped them. I mean, like, dude, if somebody slaps me, we are fighting.
Yeah.
That's how I'm wired. So it's like if I slap you and you don't swing, situation's already over. It's done.
Yeah.
Points made. I slapped you. You didn't do anything. I just made you look stupid to yourself and to everybody around you, and our problem is over. There's nothing else to do now. So that's
Right.
always been I've probably slapped over 100 people in my life. I mean, pretty hard slaps too. But
Right.
yeah, but the term buck slap came later on. But yeah, but it wasn't from that. But
Got you. Got you. Plus, that's just such a disrespectful thing to do to somebody. I'd rather get punched in the mouth than slapped across the face.
oh
Like, you
yeah,
give me
yeah.
your hardest punch as opposed to a slap, bro.
Yeah,
So,
if you
yeah.
slap me or you spit on me, man, that there's no going back from that. Like, if
You're
you
right.
slap me or spit on me, I'm going to jail.
Right. Hey, yep. Yep, for sure. Yeah. Well, as we wind down here, Uh, one of my favorite moments, not only knowing you and the times we've interacted, but one of my favorite shows ever you were a part of. And I think it was the first one that it was either the first or the second one that I worked with you as a promoter. I want to say maybe it was the second one, but it's actually the pass for it is hanging right up here on my wall. It was the first and only to this date Blaze You Dead Homies New Year's Eve party, which I was
Yeah,
offered.
in
I
Dayton.
was offered
Yeah,
in Dayton. Yep, in
yeah,
Dayton at Odd Bodies. It's the only time he's had a New Year's Eve party, and I think the reason why they did it was because they were MNE was having a New Year's Evil. I think it was in Pennsylvania that year, so nobody else had anything going on. So it was George who runs M&E, for those who might not know, which I don't know why you'd be watching this if you didn't. But George ended up texting me and was like, "Hey, we've got this. I would really like to do this show with Blaze and Odd Bodies. Can you put together a show?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And I hit you up, one of the first people, because I didn't want it to be like I was confident that we could draw with just Blaze and Minutes to Sobriety, but I'm like, man, one more act I think would really make this show solid. And so I hit you up, and you were like, "Yeah, the only thing," and this is something that I've always remembered about you. You're like, "Yeah, the only thing I need is 2 hotel rooms for my people." And I was like, "All right, well, would you need one as well?" He said, "No, I need some for my people." And that was the first thing where I'm like, man, that's some real shit. Like, you weren't worried about yourself having a hotel room. You wanted to make sure your own people were hooked up. So that was thing number one that stood out in my head. But not only that, but that show, I mean, it was just Blaze, yourself, Menace. We were the quote unquote headliners. And by the way, Super Famous Fun Time guys were on that show as well. But like, that was one of their first shows as a group. So it was still very, very much in the infancy of Super Famous. So we can't really even count them at the time. But it was one of the most fun shows I've ever done in my life because
it was an
the,
awesome show. I still remember that show. It was packed too.
it was absolutely packed. And there was what's crazy about it is that there wasn't a big pre-sale number for that show. We drew probably about 250 people at the door, which
Yeah,
that's a huge, you're competing against New Year's Eve. You know how much shit's going on New Year's Eve, and it was a packed fucking house, and it was so much fun, man. It was still to this day, like you said, I remember that show very clearly. It was one of the funnest things I've ever done in my life, and you were a part of it. And that was the first time where I really got to experience, what kind of individual you are, because stuff like that matters to me. There's a lot of people in this scene, and it's not just the underground. It's every scene. There's a lot of people who are me first. And that's where I first got the impression of like, oh, this guy is not me first. It's my people first, then me. So I've always held, and I've never told you this until this moment. I've always held this certain level of respect for you for that reason, and it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you over the last couple of years and working with you. And every time I see you, man, my face just lights up because I've got so much love for you and your entire clique, Ron, Travis. Tina, all them people, man. I've built
my guys
relationships.
feel the same way about you.
I appreciate that.
I've had you've noticed I've had the same crew for a long time, and
Yeah,
I think that's why I think it's a testament because I do love all my guys, and I do my best to look out for them. I
yeah,
my guys that I've had have pretty much been the same guys since day one. Like
yeah,
there's not really turnover with us. I mean, we all do work together, but we're all friends and we're like family.
yeah.
And I just try my best to make sure everybody's taken care of. And we're just like one big happy family over here. So that's
Yeah.
why whenever you see us, you always see the same faces because nobody really ever leaves.
Right, right. Yeah. And that's rare, especially in the underground music scene. So I just wanted to tell you that as we end this. But as always, I'm going to give the last couple of minutes to you. And if there's anything specifically you would like to plug, the floor is yours, my man.
Well, yeah. So we are in Halloween season, and at this point, uh, we actually announced this today, but Hallow Bleed 5 is in Louisville, Kentucky, and it is just we still have a few people that were getting everything, the details lined up. But this year it's going to be obviously myself, but Blaze your Dead Homie and Loon Squad are doing Hallow Bleed 5, and we got a few other surprises I probably don't want to say right now
Sure.
for reasons. But yeah, but we're bringing Blaze in, and we are doing it at Headliners, which in Louisville, that's one of the nicest premier venues you can perform in. I mean, visually beautiful. It's my favorite venue to perform in, and I have not performed in Headliners my own show in a decade. I did a show with Twisted there. I think it was the Certified Psychos tour, one of
Oh,
their
wow.
first shows that Twisted did on that tour. I came out as a surprise. I wasn't even on the bill. But George and me cooked it up that I just came out unannounced, and it shocked everybody. So but Headliners is a dope spot. It's our fifth Hallow Bleed show, and we got some cool stuff planned for it.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Buck. I appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you again soon, bro.
Anytime, Jay.